Sarah Martinez had always been different. Growing up in a small Texas town where football was religion and cheerleading was the highest aspiration for girls, she spent her afternoons reading military history books and practicing martial arts moves she learned from YouTube videos. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, encouraged her interests but warned her about the reality of military life for women. "It's not like the movies, Mija," he would say, watching her practice knife hand strikes against the heavy bag he'd hung in their garage. "The military will test everything you think you know about yourself." At 18, Sarah stood barely 5'4" and weighed 120 pounds soaking wet. Her high school guidance counselor suggested nursing or teaching. Her mother pushed for college and a nice, safe career. But Sarah had other plans. The day after graduation, she walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station with a determination that surprised even herself. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Johnson, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. He'd seen plenty of idealistic kids walk through those doors, and this petite girl with calloused hands and fire in her eyes seemed like another candidate for early discharge. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone carrying the weight of experience. "Boot camp isn't summer camp. We break people down before we build them back up. And, I'll be honest with you, it's harder for the ladies." Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life. "I'm not asking for special treatment, Staff Sergeant. I'm asking for the chance to prove myself." 3 months later, Sarah found herself on the yellow footprints at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, South Carolina. The humid air hit her like a wall as she stepped off the bus with 49 other recruits. The drill instructors appeared instantly, their voices creating a cacophony of shouted commands that turned her fellow recruits into a stumbling mass of confusion. Drill instructor Staff Sergeant Martinez, no relation, despite the shared name, singled Sarah out immediately. At 6'2" with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could shatter glass, he represented everything the Corps demanded: unwavering strength, absolute authority, and zero tolerance for weakness. Well, he bellowed, his face inches from hers. "What do we have here? Looks like someone's little sister wandered onto my island by mistake. Did you take a wrong turn looking for the mall, recruit?" The other drill instructors laughed, a sound that echoed across the squad bay like thunder. Sarah stood at attention, her eyes fixed straight ahead, fighting every instinct to respond. She'd prepared for this moment, knowing that her size and gender would make her an immediate target. The first few days blurred together in a haze of sleep deprivation, constant screaming, and physical challenges that pushed every recruit to their breaking point. Sarah watched as 3 people from her platoon were dropped for various reasons: injuries, inability to meet physical standards, and 1 voluntary discharge after a complete mental breakdown during a particularly brutal night of punishment exercises. It was during the infamous shark attack, the initial receiving phase designed to shock recruits into the reality of military life, that Sarah first demonstrated the mental resilience that would define her journey. While other recruits fumbled with their gear or broke down under the pressure, she maintained perfect composure. Her movements were precise, her responses crisp, and her bearing unmistakably military despite having no formal training. Staff Sergeant Martinez noticed. He always noticed. "Recruit Martinez," he called during a brief moment between exercises. "Front and center, now." Sarah double-timed to his position and snapped to attention. Around her, the other recruits continued their frantic attempts to arrange their gear according to the impossibly detailed standards they'd been shown once. "You think you're special, don't you, recruit?" The drill instructor's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You think because you can follow simple directions without wetting yourself, you're going to breeze through my training?" "No, sir." Sarah responded with the required volume and intensity. "No, sir, what?" "No, sir, this recruit does not think she is special, sir." Staff Sergeant Martinez studied her face, looking for cracks in her composure. He'd broken hundreds of recruits over his career, and he could usually spot the weak points within the first week. This one was different. Her eyes showed fear. Any sane person would be afraid, but underneath it was something else. Determination, maybe. Or stubbornness. He'd figure out which one soon enough. The physical training began in earnest the next morning. The Marine Corps physical fitness test was legendary for its difficulty, and the daily conditioning sessions were designed to prepare recruits for standards that many would never meet. Sarah's small frame worked against her immediately. Where larger recruits could muscle their way through exercises, she had to rely on technique and endurance. The pull-up bar became her first major obstacle. Marine Corps standards required female recruits to hang from the bar for a minimum time, but Sarah had trained herself to actually complete pull-ups, a rarity among female recruits and something that impressed even the most skeptical drill instructors. However, the number she could complete was still far below what the male recruits managed. 12 pull-ups, announced drill instructor Corporal Williams after Sarah's first recorded attempt. Not bad for a female recruit. But not good enough if you want to run with the big dogs. That comment stung more than Sarah expected. She'd worked for months to build her upper body strength, often training late into the night in her father's garage. 12 pull-ups represented countless hours of effort, blood from torn calluses, and a level of dedication that surpassed most of her peers. But, in the Marine Corps, effort meant nothing without results. The running presented a different challenge. Sarah had always been fast over distance, her slight frame giving her an advantage in endurance events. The 3-mile run was where she first showed her true potential. While bigger recruits struggled with the pace, she maintained steady breathing and perfect form throughout the entire course. Time, 21 minutes, 15 seconds, called the instructor at the finish line. It was a respectable time, faster than many of the male recruits, and well above the female standard. For the first time since arriving at Paris Island, Sarah felt a flicker of confidence. That confidence was quickly extinguished during combat training. The pugil stick bouts, exercises designed to simulate bayonet fighting, highlighted every physical disadvantage she faced. Paired against male recruits who outweighed her by 60 pounds or more, she was repeatedly knocked down, overpowered, and frustrated. Size matters in combat, recruit Staff Sergeant Martinez explained after watching her lose 5 consecutive bouts. The enemy isn't going to go easy on you because you're female. If you can't hold your own here, how do you expect to survive in the real world? It was a fair question, and one that Sarah had no good answer for. She'd always known she would face physical disadvantages, but experiencing them firsthand was different than acknowledging them in theory. That night, lying in her rack listening to the quiet sobs of other recruits who were struggling with their own challenges, she began to question whether she'd made a terrible mistake. The breaking point came during the second week of training. The platoon was conducting a combat movement exercise that required recruits to low-crawl through mud under barbed wire while drill instructors shouted instructions and fired blank ammunition over their heads. The exercise was designed to simulate battlefield conditions and test each recruit's ability to function under extreme stress. Sarah was halfway through the course when she became entangled in the wire. Her uniform caught on the barbs, and, in her attempt to free herself quickly, she only became more trapped. Around her, other recruits continued moving forward, leaving her increasingly isolated and behind. Move, recruit! Staff Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through the simulated gunfire. The enemy doesn't wait for you to sort yourself out. Panic began to set in as Sarah realized she was completely stuck. The more she struggled, the worse the situation became. Wire cut through her uniform and into her skin, drawing blood that mixed with the mud beneath her. Other drill instructors began to notice her predicament, and their voices joined the chorus of criticism raining down on her position. "Looks like our little warrior found her limit," called drill instructor Sergeant Peters, his voice carrying across the exercise area for everyone to hear. "Maybe it's time to call Mom and Dad for a ride home." The laughter from other drill instructors felt like physical blows. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of failure settling over her like a heavy blanket. Everything her father had warned her about, every doubt her mother had expressed, every skeptical look from the recruiter, it all seemed justified in that moment. But then, she heard another voice, quieter but somehow more authoritative than the others. It was coming from a drill instructor she hadn't seen before, a lean man with silver hair and bearing that commanded instant respect. "Recruit," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Stop fighting the wire and start thinking through the problem." Something in his tone cut through her panic. Sarah forced herself to stop struggling and assess her situation objectively. The wire was caught in 3 places: her left shoulder, her right hip, and her boot. Instead of pulling against all 3 points simultaneously, she began to work on them individually, using small, controlled movements. Better, the unknown drill instructor said. Now remember, in real combat, taking an extra 30 seconds to solve a problem correctly is better than spending 30 minutes fixing a problem you created by rushing. Within 2 minutes, Sarah had freed herself and was moving forward again. She finished the exercise dead last, covered in mud and blood, but she finished. As she crossed the final line, Staff Sergeant Martinez was waiting. "Took you long enough, recruit," he said, but his tone lacked its usual venom. "Report to my office after evening chow. We need to have a conversation." That evening, Sarah stood at attention in front of Staff Sergeant Martinez's desk, expecting the worst. The walls were covered with Marine Corps memorabilia, photographs of previous platoons, and certificates documenting his various qualifications and achievements. Behind him sat the mysterious drill instructor who had helped her during the exercise. "Recruit Martinez," Staff Sergeant Martinez began, "I want you to meet Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson. He's not officially part of our training cadre, but he's been observing our platoon for the past week." Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson stood and extended his hand, an unprecedented gesture between a drill instructor and recruit. "I've been watching you, Marine," he said, using the title that recruits wouldn't officially earn for another 10 weeks. "You've got something that can't be taught, but you're trying to fight this war with the wrong weapons." Sarah remained at attention, unsure how to respond. "Staff Sergeant Martinez tells me you've been struggling with the physical requirements," Thompson continued. "Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied honestly. "Good. I hate liars more than I hate quitters." He walked around her slowly, his eyes taking in details that others might miss. "What I saw today wasn't a failure. What I saw was someone who knows how to think under pressure, who doesn't give up when things get difficult, and who has the humility to listen when someone offers help." He stopped in front of her, his eyes meeting hers directly. "Those are the qualities we look for in special operations personnel. The physical requirements can be developed, but the mental framework has to be there from the beginning." Sarah's heart began to race. Special operations training was legendary within the military, programs so difficult that most people never even attempted them, let alone succeeded. "I'm not suggesting you're ready for that level of training," Thompson continued, reading her thoughts. "But I am suggesting that you're approaching this training from the wrong angle. You're trying to match bigger, stronger recruits pound for pound. That's a losing strategy." He moved to a whiteboard mounted on the wall and began drawing simple diagrams. "Special operations teams succeed because they think differently than conventional forces. They use strategy, intelligence, and adaptation to overcome challenges that brute force can't solve. Those are exactly the skills you demonstrated today when you stopped panicking and started problem solving." Staff Sergeant Martinez watched this exchange with growing interest. In 15 years of training recruits, he'd never seen Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson take personal interest in an individual Marine, especially not one who was struggling with basic requirements. "Here's what's going to happen," Thompson said, turning back to Sarah. "You're going to continue with your regular training, but you're also going to meet with me every evening for additional instruction. I'm going to teach you techniques that special operations personnel use to maximize their effectiveness regardless of their physical limitations." He paused, studying her reaction carefully. "This isn't charity, and it isn't special treatment. It's an investment in potential that I rarely see. But you need to understand, what I'm offering to teach you will be harder than anything you've experienced so far. The physical training you're struggling with now will seem easy compared to the mental challenges you'll face." Sarah's mind raced. This was an opportunity she'd never dreamed of, but it was also terrifying. She'd already been pushed to her limits, and now she was being offered training that would push her even further beyond them. "Do you accept?" Thompson asked. Without hesitation, Sarah responded. "Yes, sir." That night marked the beginning of a transformation that would reshape not only Sarah's military career but her understanding of what human potential could achieve when properly channeled. The techniques she was about to learn were developed by the most elite military units in the world, designed to enable ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things through superior strategy and unwavering mental discipline. As she lay in her rack that night, listening to the familiar sounds of 49 other recruits settling into sleep, Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and fear that she'd never experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but, for the first time since arriving at Paris Island, she felt equipped to meet them. The real training was about to begin. The next morning began like every other at Paris Island, reveille at 0500, followed by the controlled chaos of 49 recruits attempting to accomplish an impossible number of tasks in an impossibly short time. But, as Sarah moved through the familiar routine of making her rack and preparing for morning physical training, she carried with her the weight of Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson's offer. Regular training proceeded normally. Combat drills, physical conditioning, and the endless repetition of basic military skills filled the daylight hours. Sarah noticed that Staff Sergeant Martinez's attitude toward her had shifted slightly. The open hostility was gone, replaced by a more professional assessment of her performance. He still corrected her mistakes and pushed her to improve, but the personal attacks had ceased. During the afternoon pugil stick training, Sarah faced the same physical disadvantages that had frustrated her before. Paired against recruit Johnson, a former college football player who towered over her by nearly a foot, she was again knocked down repeatedly. But, this time, instead of simply trying to overpower him, she began to observe his patterns. Johnson was strong and aggressive, but he telegraphed his attacks clearly. He favored his right side, dropped his guard when he committed to a strike, and became overconfident when he gained early advantages. Sarah began to see openings, brief moments when his superior size became a disadvantage rather than an asset. "Time," called the instructor, ending another bout that Johnson had clearly won. "Better, recruit," Staff Sergeant Martinez said quietly as she removed her protective gear. "You're starting to think instead of just react." That evening, after the platoon had completed their final administrative tasks of the day, Sarah reported to a small classroom building she'd never entered before. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson was waiting, along with materials she didn't recognize, detailed anatomical charts, tactical manuals, and what appeared to be psychological assessment forms. "Sit down, Marine," Thompson said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. The informal tone was jarring after weeks of rigid military protocol. "Before we begin, I need you to understand what you're volunteering for." He opened a thick manual and turned it toward her. The pages contained detailed diagrams of human anatomy, focusing on pressure points, joint vulnerabilities, and neurological pathways. "Special operations personnel succeed because they understand that every conflict has multiple dimensions," Thompson began. "Physical strength is just one tool in a much larger toolkit. What I'm going to teach you are techniques that smaller operators use to neutralize larger threats through superior knowledge and strategy." The first lesson focused on something Thompson called tactical awareness. Using the anatomical charts, he showed Sarah how to identify an opponent's center of gravity, natural balance points, and structural weaknesses that had nothing to do with muscle mass. "Every human body follows the same basic principles of physics," he explained, pointing to specific areas on the charts. "If you understand leverage, angles, and momentum, size becomes much less important than positioning and timing." He moved to a cleared area of the classroom and demonstrated basic techniques. Unlike the aggressive confrontation style taught in regular training, these movements were fluid and economical. Instead of meeting force with force, they redirected it. "Your opponent's strength becomes your advantage," Thompson said as he walked through a defensive sequence. "If someone rushes at you with superior power, you don't try to stop them. You guide them where you want them to go and let their own momentum work against them." Sarah practiced the movements, awkward at first but gradually understanding the underlying principles. These weren't the kind of techniques that could be mastered quickly, but she could already see their potential application. "This is just the beginning," Thompson warned. "Physical techniques are useless without the proper mental framework. Tomorrow we'll start working on situational awareness and tactical thinking. The following evening brought lessons in what Thompson called battlefield psychology. Using actual case studies from special operations missions, he taught Sarah how to read people's intentions through their body language, vocal patterns, and behavioral cues. Combat isn't just about defeating an opponent, he explained. It's about understanding them well enough to predict their actions before they take them. In special operations, we call this getting inside your opponent's OODA loop. He drew a circular diagram on the whiteboard: observe, orient, decide, act. Every person in a conflict situation goes through this cycle continuously. The key to victory is completing your cycle faster than your opponent completes theirs. If you can observe their situation, orient to their probable response, decide on your counteraction, and act before they've finished their decision-making process, you control the engagement regardless of physical advantages they might have. These concepts were entirely new to Sarah, but they resonated with something she'd always understood intuitively. Growing up smaller than most of her peers, she'd learned to anticipate bullying behavior and avoid confrontations she couldn't win. Thompson was teaching her to systematize and weaponize that same intuitive understanding. The third night introduced stress inoculation training. Thompson created artificial stress conditions, loud noises, flashing lights, time pressure, and required Sarah to perform complex mental tasks while maintaining perfect physical control. Special operations personnel function in environments where most people would panic, he explained as sirens blared from speakers around the room. The ability to think clearly under extreme stress is what separates professionals from amateurs. Sarah struggled initially, her performance degrading significantly when the environmental stressors were introduced. But Thompson had anticipated this reaction. Failure under stress is normal, he said, stopping the exercise. What matters is your ability to recognize when stress is affecting your performance and implement techniques to compensate for it. He taught her breathing exercises designed to maintain oxygen flow under pressure, mental focusing techniques that prevented panic from overwhelming rational thought, and physical centering methods that maintained balance and coordination even when adrenaline flooded her system. As the days progressed, Sarah began to notice changes in her regular training performance. The physical challenges hadn't become easier, but her approach to them had fundamentally shifted. Instead of trying to muscle through obstacles, she found ways to solve them efficiently. Instead of competing directly with stronger recruits, she found alternative paths to success that played to her advantages rather than highlighting her weaknesses. The change was most noticeable during combat training exercises. In a simulated urban warfare scenario, recruits were required to clear a series of rooms containing hidden threats. Most attacked the problem with overwhelming force, charging through doorways and attempting to dominate each room through aggressive action. Sarah took a different approach. She used the reconnaissance techniques Thompson had taught her to gather information about each room before entering. She identified the likely positions of threats based on sound and shadow patterns. When she did move, it was with surgical precision rather than brute force. Recruit Martinez called the exercise controller as she completed the course. Time, 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Threats neutralized, all. Ammunition expended, minimal. Injuries sustained, none. It was the best performance by any recruit that day, male or female. Staff Sergeant Martinez watched from the observation area, his expression unreadable. That evening's session with Thompson focused on what he called mental resilience under extended pressure. Physical exhaustion is temporary, he explained. Mental exhaustion can be permanent if you don't manage it properly. Special operations missions often require peak performance for days or weeks without adequate rest. The techniques I'm teaching you will help you maintain effectiveness even when your body wants to quit. He introduced meditation techniques adapted for military use, methods for compartmentalizing stress that prevented small problems from becoming overwhelming burdens, and strategies for maintaining motivation when traditional incentives were absent. The human mind is remarkably adaptable, Thompson said. But it requires training just like any other tool. Most people never develop their mental capacities beyond basic levels because they don't understand the principles involved. These lessons were perhaps the most challenging for Sarah. Physical exercises had clear success metrics: either you completed them or you didn't. Mental training was more subjective, requiring her to honestly assess her own psychological state and identify areas of weakness she'd never acknowledged before. "I can teach you techniques," Thompson explained, "but you have to do the work of implementing them. Mental strength isn't something that can be given to you. It has to be developed through consistent practice under increasingly difficult conditions." The real test came during the platoon's first major field exercise. For 72 hours, recruits were required to survive in a simulated combat environment with minimal food, water, and sleep. They faced constant harassment from drill instructors playing the role of enemy forces, unexpected challenges that tested their ability to adapt under pressure, and physical demands that pushed everyone to their breaking point. By the second day, several recruits were showing signs of serious strain. 2 had been evacuated for medical reasons, and several others were clearly struggling to maintain basic functionality. The drill instructors intensified their pressure, looking for additional recruits to eliminate from the program. Sarah found herself tested in ways she'd never experienced before. 48 hours without real sleep, minimal nutrition, and constant physical demands would have broken her before Thompson's training. But now she had tools to manage the situation. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her judgment, she used the breathing techniques to maintain mental clarity. When physical pain made movement difficult, she employed the centering exercises to maintain coordination. When drill instructors attempted to break her psychologically, she recognized their tactics and implemented countermeasures that preserved her mental resilience. The defining moment came on the third night. The platoon was conducting a nighttime navigation exercise when they were ambushed by opposing forces. In the confusion that followed, recruits scattered in different directions, breaking unit cohesion and creating chaos that the drill instructors exploited ruthlessly. Sarah found herself separated from the main group with 3 other recruits who were clearly panicking. Private Collins was hyperventilating, Private Johnson had suffered a mild injury during the scramble, and Private Williams was showing signs of complete mental breakdown. In the regular course of training, this would have been a disaster. 4 isolated recruits against a numerically superior enemy force with no clear escape route and limited resources. Most recruits would have either attempted a hopeless direct confrontation or simply surrendered to avoid making the situation worse. But Sarah saw the situation differently. Using the tactical analysis skills Thompson had taught her, she assessed their actual position versus their apparent position. The drill instructors were using psychological pressure to make the situation seem more hopeless than it actually was. They had advantages that could be exploited if approached correctly. "Listen to me," she whispered to her fellow recruits, her voice carrying an authority that surprised them. "We're not trapped. We're hidden. They don't know exactly where we are, or they would have acted already." She used hand signals to position the others in a defensive formation that maximized their limited capabilities while minimizing their exposure. Then, she implemented reconnaissance techniques to gather information about their opponent's positions and likely courses of action. "Collins, control your breathing," she instructed quietly. "Use the 4-count method, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Johnson, how bad is that injury? Can you move quietly for short distances?" The confidence in her voice had a calming effect on the others. Instead of panicking, they began to function as a unit under her informal leadership. Over the next hour, Sarah guided the group through a series of movements that avoided direct confrontation while accomplishing their assigned objectives. She used misdirection to confuse the pursuing drill instructors, camouflage techniques to mask their actual positions, and timing strategies that turned their apparent disadvantages into tactical assets. When they finally rejoined the main platoon, they had successfully completed their mission without being captured, the only group to achieve that result. More importantly, they had maintained unit cohesion and demonstrated the kind of leadership under pressure that the Marine Corps valued most highly. Staff Sergeant Martinez was waiting when they arrived at the rally point. "Recruit Martinez," he called. "Front and center." Sarah approached, expecting criticism for taking unauthorized leadership of the group. Instead, Martinez studied her with something that might have been respect. "Explain to me how 4 separated recruits managed to complete their objectives while the rest of the platoon was getting their asses handed to them." Sarah chose her words carefully. We assessed our situation objectively, identified our available resources, and developed a plan that worked with our capabilities rather than against them, sir. And who developed this plan? It was a group effort, sir, Sarah replied, though everyone present knew that wasn't entirely accurate. Martinez nodded slowly. Group effort. I see. He looked at the other 3 recruits, who were clearly exhausted but standing tall. Is that how you remember it? Yes, sir, they replied in unison, their loyalty to Sarah evident. Interesting, Martinez said. Well, whatever kind of group effort produced those results, I want to see more of it. As the exercise continued, word of Sarah's performance began to spread throughout the training cadre. Drill instructors who had previously dismissed her as an inevitable failure began to watch her more carefully. Her regular performance continued to improve as she integrated Thompson's teachings with conventional training methods. The change was most evident in her interaction with other recruits. Previously, she had been seen as a liability, someone who might hold back the platoon's overall performance. Now, recruits sought her advice when facing difficult challenges, and her reputation as a problem solver began to overshadow her earlier struggles with physical requirements. This shift in perception created new challenges. Some recruits resented her growing influence, particularly those who felt their own leadership ambitions were being overshadowed. The competitiveness that drill instructors fostered to motivate performance began to work against platoon unity as some individuals saw Sarah's success as a threat to their own advancement. The tension came to a head during a close-quarters combat exercise. Recruits were paired for controlled sparring matches designed to test their application of basic fighting techniques under pressure. Sarah found herself matched against recruit Davis, a former amateur boxer who had made his resentment of her growing reputation increasingly obvious. "Let's see what all the fuss is about," Davis said as they faced each other in the fighting circle. His tone carried more than the usual competitive edge, there was genuine hostility there. The match began conventionally, with both fighters testing each other's reflexes and defensive capabilities. But Davis quickly escalated the intensity beyond what was appropriate for a training exercise. His attacks became more aggressive, his techniques less controlled, and his obvious intention to inflict actual injury rather than simply demonstrate superior skill. Sarah recognized the escalation immediately. This wasn't the kind of conflict that could be won through superior technique alone. Davis was bigger, stronger, more experienced in conventional fighting, and clearly motivated by personal animosity rather than professional competitiveness. But Thompson's training had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. Instead of meeting aggression with aggression, she shifted to a defensive strategy that used Davis's emotional investment against him. She absorbed his initial attacks without retaliating, studying his patterns while appearing to be overwhelmed. Davis's confidence grew as Sarah seemed to struggle against his assault. He became more reckless, committing fully to attacks that would have been devastating if they landed cleanly. But Sarah was no longer where he expected her to be. Using the redirection techniques Thompson had taught her, she began to guide his momentum in directions that created opportunities for counterstrike. The end came suddenly. Davis launched what he intended to be a finishing combination, putting all his strength behind a series of attacks that would have ended the match decisively. But Sarah had anticipated the sequence based on patterns she'd observed in his earlier movements. Instead of being there to receive the attack, she stepped inside his guard at precisely the right moment and applied a joint manipulation technique that sent him to the ground instantly. The entire exercise area fell silent. Davis lay on the ground, temporarily stunned but uninjured, while Sarah stood over him in a textbook fighting stance. The technique she'd used was far beyond anything taught in basic training, executed with a precision that spoke of extensive specialized instruction. Staff Sergeant Martinez stepped into the fighting circle, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn that technique, recruit?" he asked quietly. Sarah came to attention, her mind racing. She couldn't reveal Thompson's training without potentially compromising his position, but she also couldn't lie to a direct question from her drill instructor. "I've been studying additional materials during my personal time, sir," she replied carefully. "Military combatives manuals and related training resources." It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. Martinez studied her face, clearly aware that there was more to the story. "I see," he said finally. "Well, whatever materials you've been studying, I suggest you share them with your fellow recruits. That kind of skill development benefits the entire platoon." That evening's session with Thompson took on a different tone. "You're attracting attention," he observed without preamble. "That's both good and bad for your long-term development." He explained the delicate balance required when demonstrating advanced capabilities in a conventional training environment. Too little performance improvement and the additional training would be wasted. Too much improvement too quickly and it could create suspicion about the source of her new abilities. Special operations personnel learn to modulate their performance based on the situation, he said. Sometimes you want to demonstrate your full capabilities to establish credibility. Sometimes you want to appear average to avoid unwanted attention. The key is understanding which strategy serves your objectives in any given situation. This lesson in tactical deception was perhaps the most sophisticated concept Thompson had introduced. It required Sarah to think several steps ahead, anticipating not just immediate consequences but secondary and tertiary effects of her actions. Your performance today achieved several important objectives, Thompson analyzed. You established yourself as someone who can handle serious threats, you demonstrated that underestimating you is dangerous, and you did it in a way that appeared to be the result of personal initiative rather than outside instruction. He paused, studying her reaction to his assessment. But you also created new problems. Davis will be looking for revenge, other recruits will be wondering about the source of your new abilities, and the training cadre will be watching you more closely than before. How you handle these consequences will determine whether today was a step forward or a step backward in your development. The complexity of managing these multiple considerations while continuing to excel in regular training was overwhelming. Sarah felt the weight of expectations from multiple directions: Thompson's advanced instruction, Staff Sergeant Martinez's growing confidence in her abilities, the platoon's reliance on her problem-solving skills, and her own determination to prove that she belonged in the Marine Corps. "This is where most people fail," Thompson said, reading her thoughts. "Not because they can't learn the techniques, but because they can't handle the mental pressure of applying them effectively while managing all the other demands of military training." He moved to the whiteboard and drew a complex diagram showing multiple interconnected systems. Special operations success requires simultaneous management of tactical, strategic, social, and psychological factors. Most people can handle one or two of these at a time. Elite operators learn to handle all of them simultaneously while maintaining peak performance in their primary mission. The weeks that followed tested every aspect of Sarah's development. She faced increasing challenges from jealous recruits, closer scrutiny from drill instructors, and the constant pressure of Thompson's advanced training sessions. Each day required her to balance multiple competing demands while continuing to improve her performance across all areas. But, gradually, she began to see how the various elements of her training fitted together. The physical techniques gave her confidence to face direct threats. The mental training allowed her to think clearly under pressure. The tactical instruction helped her understand complex situations and develop effective responses. Most importantly, the integration of all these elements was creating capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual parts. As the 8th week of training approached, Sarah realized that she had been fundamentally changed by the experience. The frightened young woman who had arrived at Paris Island no longer existed. In her place was someone who understood that true strength came not from physical power alone, but from the intelligent application of all available resources in service of clearly defined objectives. The final test was still ahead, but, for the first time since beginning this journey, Sarah felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. The final phase of Marine Corps training began with an ominous announcement from Staff Sergeant Martinez during morning formation. The Crucible, a 54-hour field exercise designed to test everything recruits had learned over the previous 11 weeks, would begin in 72 hours. It was the ultimate trial that determined who would earn the title Marine and who would be sent home as another failed recruit. "Listen up, you pathetic excuses for future Marines," Martinez bellowed, his voice carrying across the parade deck. "The Crucible will separate those who have what it takes from those who have been fooling themselves for the past 3 months. 40% of you will not complete this exercise successfully. Sarah felt her stomach tighten at those words. After everything she had accomplished, everything Thompson had taught her, the possibility of failure at this final stage was terrifying. Around her, she could see similar anxiety reflected in the faces of her fellow recruits. You will receive minimal food, minimal water, and no sleep for over 2 days, Martinez continued. You will face combat scenarios, physical challenges, and psychological pressure designed to break down your defenses and expose your true character. Some of you will quit. Some of you will be removed for safety reasons. Some of you will fail to meet the standards required of United States Marines. That evening's session with Thompson took on a different urgency. Instead of introducing new concepts, he focused on integration and application of everything Sarah had learned over the past 8 weeks. The crucible isn't designed to test your physical capabilities, he explained, spreading tactical maps across the table. It's designed to test your ability to function as a leader when everything is going wrong. The physical challenges are just the platform. What matters is how you respond when your people are counting on you and traditional solutions aren't available. He pointed to specific locations on the maps where previous crucible exercises had encountered problems. These are historical failure points, he said. Places where recruits consistently make mistakes that compromise their ability to complete the exercise. What I'm about to show you are the patterns that separate successful leaders from those who fold under pressure. The analysis was unlike anything covered in regular training. Thompson showed Sarah how to read terrain not just for tactical advantages, but for psychological effects on exhausted personnel. He taught her to recognize the early signs of mental breakdown in team members and implement interventions before problems became critical. Most importantly, he showed her how to maintain group cohesion when individual motivations were failing. Special operations teams succeed because they understand that every person has a breaking point, Thompson explained. The key is recognizing when someone is approaching that point and providing the support they need to push through it. Sometimes that's tactical assistance. Sometimes it's emotional encouragement. Sometimes it's taking on additional responsibility yourself so they can focus on what they do best. The final lesson focused on what Thompson called battlefield innovation. Using case studies from actual special operations missions, he showed Sarah how elite units solved problems that had no prescribed solutions by combining available resources in unexpected ways. The crucible will present you with challenges that can't be solved using standard techniques, he warned. Your drill instructors will be looking for recruits who can think creatively under extreme pressure. That's the quality that separates future leaders from future followers. The 3 days of final preparation passed in a blur of equipment checks, final physical conditioning, and increasingly obvious anxiety among the recruits. Several people approached Sarah for advice, having observed her transformation over the past weeks. She shared what she could without revealing the source of her specialized knowledge, focusing on basic stress management and tactical thinking principles. On the morning of the crucible, the platoon assembled in full combat gear before dawn. Each recruit carried a 40-pound pack containing minimal survival supplies, and they would receive no additional resources for the duration of the exercise. Staff Sergeant Martinez stood before them with an expression that mixed pride and concern. Today you stop being recruits, he announced. You either become Marines, or you become civilians who tried and failed. There is no middle ground, no partial credit, and no second chances. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson stood with the other evaluators, his presence adding weight to the moment. Sarah caught his eye briefly and saw something that might have been confidence in his expression. The first 24 hours tested every aspect of basic training. Combat scenarios, navigation challenges, physical obstacles, and team coordination exercises came in rapid succession with no time for recovery between events. By the end of the first day, 3 recruits had been evacuated for medical reasons and 2 had voluntarily withdrawn from the program. Sarah found herself naturally assuming leadership responsibilities as the exercise progressed. Her combination of technical competence and calm decision-making under pressure inspired confidence from other recruits who were struggling with their own challenges. More importantly, she began to see opportunities to apply Thompson's advanced teachings in ways that benefited the entire group. During a simulated casualty evacuation exercise, the platoon was required to transport wounded personnel across difficult terrain while under simulated enemy fire. The standard approach would have been to assign the strongest recruits to carry the casualties while others provided security. But Sarah recognized an opportunity to demonstrate more sophisticated tactical thinking. Instead of relying solely on physical strength, she organized the movement using principles of mechanical advantage that Thompson had taught her. By constructing improvised stretchers and using rope and pulley systems, the platoon was able to move casualties faster and with less exhaustion than conventional methods would have allowed. "Outstanding problem-solving, recruit," commented drill instructor Sergeant Peters, who had been observing the exercise. "Where did that idea come from?" "Basic physics applied to tactical problems, sir," Sarah replied. "Maximum efficiency through proper use of available resources." The innovation caught the attention of other evaluators, who began watching Sarah's performance more carefully. Word spread among the training cadre that something unusual was happening with the recruit who had started the program as a questionable performer. The second day brought the most challenging phase of the exercise. Sleep-deprived, undernourished, and physically exhausted, recruits faced scenarios specifically designed to test their ability to function when their bodies wanted to quit. This was where Thompson's training in stress management and mental resilience became most valuable. Sarah used the breathing techniques to maintain mental clarity despite exhaustion. She employed the centering exercises to preserve coordination when fatigue made simple movements difficult. Most importantly, she implemented the psychological support strategies to help fellow recruits who were approaching their breaking points. Private Williams, who had struggled throughout training, began showing signs of serious mental breakdown during a nighttime navigation exercise. She was hyperventilating, crying, and expressing her intention to quit the program rather than continue with what seemed like an impossible task. In the normal course of events, Williams would have been removed from the exercise and eliminated from the program. But Sarah recognized this as exactly the kind of situation Thompson had prepared her for. Instead of accepting the apparent inevitability of Williams' failure, she intervened with techniques designed to restore psychological equilibrium. "Williams, look at me," Sarah said firmly, positioning herself directly in front of her fellow recruit. "You're not thinking clearly right now because your brain isn't getting enough oxygen. We're going to fix that first, then worry about everything else." She guided Williams through the breathing exercises Thompson had taught her, modified for someone experiencing acute stress reaction. Within minutes, Williams' hyperventilation stopped and her panic began to subside. "Better?" Sarah asked. Williams nodded, wiping tears from her face. "Good. Now listen carefully. You've made it through 11 weeks of training that most people can't complete. You've overcome every challenge they've thrown at you so far. This one isn't any different, it just feels different because you're tired and scared." Sarah continued working with Williams, providing exactly the kind of psychological support that prevented individual failures from cascading into group breakdown. But she also recognized that this intervention was being observed by evaluators who were looking for leadership potential under extreme conditions. The final challenge came during the third night. The platoon was required to assault a fortified position defended by drill instructors using advanced tactical equipment. It was the most complex scenario they had faced, requiring coordination between multiple teams, precise timing, and the kind of battlefield innovation that Thompson had emphasized during their final session. The standard approach would have been a frontal assault using overwhelming force. But Sarah could see that this was exactly the kind of thinking that the evaluators expected recruits to default to under pressure. The defenders were positioned to counter conventional attacks, and any attempt to match force with force would result in failure. Instead, Sarah proposed a strategy that combined misdirection, technical innovation, and unconventional timing. Using skills she had learned from Thompson's case studies, she identified weaknesses in the defensive position that could be exploited through superior intelligence rather than superior firepower. "We're not going to attack where they expect us to attack," she explained to the team leaders during a brief planning session. "We're going to make them think we're attacking in one location while we actually accomplish our objectives somewhere else entirely." The plan required precise coordination and flawless execution, but it played to the platoon's actual strengths rather than forcing them to compete in areas where they were disadvantaged. More importantly, it demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that separated future leaders from future followers. The assault succeeded brilliantly. While the defenders focused their attention on the diversionary attack, Sarah led a small team through an approach route that no one had anticipated. They neutralized the primary defensive positions before the drill instructors realized what was happening, accomplishing their objectives with minimal casualties and maximum efficiency. Cease fire. Cease fire, called the exercise controller. Objective secured. Time, 12 minutes, 37 seconds. It was the fastest completion of that particular scenario in the recorded history of the exercise. Staff Sergeant Martinez stood in the aftermath, shaking his head in amazement. "Recruit Martinez," he called. "Front and center. Now." Sarah approached, her heart racing despite the successful completion of the mission. She had pushed the boundaries of conventional training, and she wasn't sure how that would be received by evaluators who valued adherence to established procedures. "Explain to me how you developed that assault plan," Martinez demanded. Sarah chose her words carefully. "I analyzed the defensive position, identified its inherent weaknesses, and developed an approach that maximized our advantages while minimizing direct confrontation with the enemy's strengths, sir." "And where did you learn to conduct that kind of tactical analysis?" This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. Too much detail would reveal Thompson's training, but too little would seem evasive. "I've been studying military history and tactical manuals during my personal time, sir," she replied. "I wanted to understand the principles behind successful military operations." Martinez studied her face, clearly aware that there was more to the story. But, before he could pursue the question further, Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson approached. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," Thompson said. "I'd like to have a word with Recruit Martinez. Privately." The two moved away from the other recruits and evaluators. In the dim light, Sarah could see Thompson's expression, but she couldn't read it. "You've done exceptionally well," Thompson said without preamble. "Better than I expected when we began this process. But now you face a choice that will determine the rest of your military career." He paused, studying her reaction. "Based on your performance during this exercise, you will be offered opportunities that most Marines never receive. Special operations units are always looking for personnel who demonstrate the kind of capabilities you've shown here. But accepting those opportunities means committing to a level of service that most people can't sustain." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Special operations assignment was beyond anything she had dared to hope for when she first walked into the recruiting station. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked. "Force reconnaissance, special operations command, possibly even cross-training with other service branches in specialized roles," Thompson replied. "The kind of assignments where the techniques I've taught you would be developed and applied at the highest levels." The weight of the moment was almost overwhelming. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, had led to this opportunity to join the most elite elements of the military. "There's one condition," Thompson continued. "The training you would receive in special operations units makes what we've done together look like basic preparation. The physical demands, mental pressure, and operational requirements are beyond what most people can handle. Failure rates in those programs are extremely high, and the consequences of failure are more serious than anything you've experienced here." Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The doubt and skepticism she had faced, the physical challenges that had nearly broken her, the mental training that had transformed her understanding of what was possible. All of it had led to this choice. "I accept," she said without hesitation. Thompson nodded, something that might have been pride flickering across his face. "I thought you might," he said. "We'll discuss the details after graduation. For now, focus on completing the crucible and earning your eagle, globe, and anchor." The final hours of the exercise passed in a blur of exhaustion and anticipation. Sarah helped guide her fellow recruits through the remaining challenges, applying everything she had learned to ensure that as many as possible would successfully complete the program. When the final whistle sounded, 37 of the original 49 recruits remained standing. Sarah was among them, but, more than that, she had emerged as one of the clear leaders of her class. The quiet young woman who had struggled with basic physical requirements had become someone who could solve complex problems under extreme pressure and inspire others to exceed their own limitations. Graduation day arrived with the pageantry and tradition that marked every Marine Corps ceremony. Families gathered to witness the transformation of recruits into Marines, and Sarah's parents were among them. Her father, the retired Army sergeant who had warned her about the realities of military life, looked at her with unmistakable pride. "I knew you had it in you, Mija," he said during the brief family time allowed after the ceremony. "But I never imagined you would excel to this degree." Her mother, who had worried constantly during the months of training, simply held her and cried tears of relief and joy. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "And so scared about what comes next." Sarah understood her mother's fear. The path she had chosen would lead to challenges and dangers that most people never faced. But she also knew that she was prepared for those challenges in ways that few people could understand. Later that day, as the celebrations wound down and families departed, Sarah met with Master Gunnery Sergeant Thompson for the final time at Parris Island. "Your special operations training begins in 60 days, he informed her. "You'll report to Camp Pendleton for the initial selection process. What you've learned here will help you survive that training, but it's only the beginning of what you'll need to develop." He handed her a thick manual bound in unmarked covers. "Additional study material," he explained. "Techniques and principles that build on what we've covered. You'll need to master this content before you report for duty." Sarah accepted the manual, feeling its weight both physically and symbolically. "One final piece of advice," Thompson said. "Remember that the goal isn't to prove that you're better than everyone else. The goal is to become the best version of yourself that you're capable of being. The military will give you opportunities to develop capabilities you never knew you had, but only if you remain humble enough to keep learning and growing." 3 months later, Sarah stood on another set of yellow footprints at another military installation, surrounded by candidates for special operations training who represented the best of the best from across the armed forces. But, this time, she wasn't the uncertain young woman who had once wondered if she belonged. She was a Marine who understood that true strength came not from physical power alone, but from the intelligent application of all available resources in service of a greater purpose. She had learned to think strategically, act tactically, and lead through demonstrated competence rather than inherited authority. Most importantly, she had learned that the human capacity for growth and adaptation was far greater than most people ever realized. The techniques that Thompson had taught her weren't just military skills, they were principles for maximizing human potential in any challenging environment. As the special operations instructors began their initial assessment of the candidates, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and determination that had carried her through every challenge since that first day at Parris Island. The training ahead would be harder than anything she had yet experienced, but she was ready. The quiet young woman from Texas who had once struggled with basic physical requirements was gone forever. In her place stood a Marine who understood that every apparent limitation was simply an opportunity to find a better solution, every setback was simply information to be incorporated into the next attempt, and every challenge was simply another chance to discover what she was truly capable of achieving. The real adventure was just beginning.